this is a collaborative art. If you look at what's being done on the instrument, it just keeps exponentially developing.
This is like a nerdy based question, although maybe we're in
Yeah,
nerdy based
we're,
territory.
we're already deep in it.
Mark,
Yeah.
here in San Francisco.
Yeah, thank you.
The last time I chatted with you, actually, the last time I chatted with you for the podcast, we were talking about Jack Trip over the pandemic. Gary
right.
Carr had reached out to me and asked some questions, and I felt Gary Carr asked about it. There's an obligation to the bass community to learn. So,
Yeah.
But before that, I think it was maybe 2016 or something like
Yeah.
that in your studio at UCSD.
That's right.
And I got to
Right.
see you teach some and then chat, and it was just
Right.
great. And I can't believe that was whatever, 8 years ago
Yeah.
at this point or something like
Yeah.
that. So
Way pre-pandemic.
way pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you're able to carve out a little bit of
Thank you.
time
Yeah, me
here
too. Thank
before
you.
the gig.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love Times of Change. I love all the projects you do and the explorations that you do on the bass and music, and what you're doing is super interesting. But
Thank you.
I'm really digging just the world. Like, I think you refer to the bass as an orchestra in your write-up for
Right,
this,
right.
Yeah, talk about that.
I forget what the genesis of it was, but obviously the instrument has lots of different voices and registers, and because of its great depth, the highest partial sound, and there's you can orchestrate it as such as having it's a perfect polyphonic instrument, and that transcends its function, and it spoke to me, and and after as a kid, having heard Hendrix and being impressed by enabled by listening to Mingus, it really spoke to me, and then meeting Bert Turetsky, it was just sort of like I was off. And even as a teenager, I was doing sound on sound recording, and I don't know how it happened. That's how my mind works, and the bass seemed like a perfect vehicle for this stuff.
I've referred to you to lots of people on the podcast. I say, like, you think you found everything there is to do on 4 strings, and then you look at what Mark Dresser is doing, and obviously you're doing they're beyond 4 strings and with the tines and all sorts of things that you're doing on this particular album. But even just it's incredible, just the detail work that you've done and what you explore in terms of all the different partials and the back lengths and the pickups and the fingerboard, and you're using so many different things on this latest album.
Well, thanks. But if you look at what's being done on the instrument, it just keeps exponentially developing from whatever perspective. Technically, what virtuosity, what was considered impossible, and then the sonic dimensions to keep. I just keep finding new stuff. It never stops. So there's just seems to be levels upon levels, and it's just it's big fun.
This bass maker,
Kent McLagan.
Yes,
yeah.
So you've had a bass from him for a while, right?
It was 2015.
Okay.
I got my first bass from him. Before I asked him to build me a bass, he'd been building these custom-made pickups into my fingerboard. I had magnetic pickups that I used to suspend over the headstock to pick up the bitones and harmonics, and I had been using variations of that for over 20 years. And around 2000, it had become unstable, and also it added extra weight. And I was playing in Boulder, and I stopped in Denver, and Kent was kind enough to lend me an instrument, and I knew he was building basses, and I asked him, Kent, do you think, I would love to have pickups built into the fingerboard. He says, oh, that's interesting. Let me think about it. So at the time, and he's a real inventive, curious person. So he had a bass that he would literally screw on the fingerboard so he could try out different potentials of making hand-wound pickups under each string. And I mean, no one's going to do that kind of investigation. And I said I would love to have it in 2 positions. So instead of it picking just from the perspective of the nut, it would pick it up also from the perspective of the middle of the neck. So a string length could be 3 discrete pitches. And, I didn't exactly know. I mean, I knew what I was getting into because I could hear that acoustically. Or when I recorded, even in 1983, I had done recording with microphones and knew that this was viable, musically viable. It was just technically I had no idea how to do it. So Kent, he would send me recordings. He would try something out and he would send me a cassette of a recording when I was living in New York, and I'd give him feedback, and we went back and forth on this for nearly, 3/4 of a year. And he said, I think we got it. I said, great. I said, should I send you a bass? He says, no, just have David Gage remove the fingerboard, but I need exact measurements from the overstand every 2 inches. And, he nailed it. He's super precise. And, and he's done it to every bass, I have like 4 basses that he's done it to. And eventually in 2014, I think, I asked him to build me a travel bass. So the neck came off. The whole idea was it had to weigh under 50 pounds. And he's just his whole idea, his goal at the time was to make a sustainable instrument that, that was sustainable woods, that was inexpensive, that a person without a lot of means could, and plus the basses sounded good. So it's just like, and I had some research money from the university. I said, why not go for it? And he really knows how I play. So we had been working on this. It just made sense. So he did that. And then and I've been playing it ever since. And so that recording, and in 2015, I brought up the idea of the tines because there was a guy named, or a composer, he was a teacher I studied with in San Diego named Robert Erickson, had built these giant tines that were stroked rods. And I remember really being impressed with the sound because you're just endlessly ring. And I also thought about, the idea of a water phone or an mbira. So something that was a cross between an mbira and the stroked rods. And so that's all I gave him. So literally he's made me 10 or 11 different iterations of it. The first were attached to the tailpiece, and they look like an mbira, with blades, but that's not a very resonant position. It doesn't conduct through the bridge. So we figured we had to conduct through the bridge for it to sound anything. But the issue with that was, how do you connect to the bridge without dampening the instrument? So, and of course, there's no way that it doesn't dampen the instrument. So, well, then what is tolerable? What is robust? What can you integrate? So, it tends to be that only with a couple bands that I play with them all the time on the bass. Because that, these ensembles, whether it's my trio or a trio with, I have a trio with a multi-flutist, Matthias Ziegler, and the pianist, Demon Maroney. And then I recently did a trio with my fellow alumni from the Braxton Quartet, with Jerry Hemingway and Marilyn Crispo, and I used it the whole time because that band tends to be really sonic, so anyhow, it worked perfectly.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
So they can come on and off. You can.
Yeah, they're detachable, okay. And then the pickups I use with a volume pedal, so I bring them in when I want. So it's not, I like to use it like an instrument and play with the envelopes of dynamics. It's not, if it's on all the time, it's a drag. How
does what we're hearing on this latest album come to life? Like, is this a result of are you just improvising and then a song takes shape? Or like, how does what ends up on this album just come into being?
I go into the studio, and this, and particularly the genesis of this date was a former graduate student named Alexandria Smith said, man, I'd love to, I showed her the instrument. She said, I'd love to record you. And she's a gifted engineer. I said, sure. So basically we spent an afternoon recording, and then it sat around for quite a while. And then we said, anyhow, basically what the process was, we would edit these improvisations. So I would take out the fat and just, you listen over and over until you find the core materials, and you realize, well, you sculpt out, you make a sculpture out of it. It's a recording process. And exactly, and then some of them you end up transcribing because they work, and or not. And but the transcription process becomes really hairy because the notational issues are very, very intense, especially with tides, where a lot of the techniques I use, that have pressure, have vertical bowing, and then the tines are not a string. They have a different overtone series than a string. They're a cantilever. So anyhow, that was not the question, but the basically I would take these improvisations and then I would edit them till I had what I wanted, and then I sent out 40 minutes of music to 2 labels, and I got actually 3 labels, and 2 immediately responded, "We want to put it out," and which had never happened before. A solo bass record. Who's going to put out a solo? But the response was so immediate, and one of the labels I had done Unveil, a wonderful label from Portugal, Clean Feed. And then I also contacted Pyroclastic, label of Chris Davis, and she said, "I can't put it out this year." So I put it out, in 2023. I said, "Well, that's cool." She said, "But what I can offer you is a publicist." And I know how expensive a publicist is. That's, that means that it will be heard. The word will get out, it'll get reviewed. And in an area of music when where is the revenue? Where is the business in our business? It's especially with CDs. I mean, it's a medium that's almost an anachronism. I don't have any students who have CD players, so and so everything's a download. Anyhow, that's another discussion. But I went with Pyroclastic, and I'm glad I did, though I'll forever grateful, and to Clean Feed. It's been good to me. But
It's incredible. I too, I have a CD player, but I have to kind of look for it
Yeah.
these days. And
do you listen to your CDs?
No,
Yeah.
but and maybe this is just like as I'm getting older, reminiscing about but I do remember the benefits of having a physical medium like that, or I
Right.
think you magnify when you go to LPs. Like I remember
Right.
my job in college was working at the music library,
Right.
and they had the Deering Listening Library at Northwestern had this just jazz wall,
Yeah.
like really surrounding the place. I would go and I would just pull,
Yeah.
name your artist and look through, and especially, this isn't the case on a solo bass album, but how many people that contribute to a project that just kind of get lost
Yeah.
when there's not an easy way to give credits on a download.
Right. Well, and for that reason, I always talk about Alexandria and I always talk about Kent because because this is a collaborative art. Okay, it's a solo bass record, but what I would put out was completely based around the instrument he made me and the recording, the perspective that she was able to capture. And it's beautifully recorded, and it's hyper detailed, and that makes it, that in itself makes it really interesting. It offers something that I wouldn't get out of a traditional recording.
And then there's some of these tracks are on the 5-string.
Right. Pyroclastic said, "We want to do it." I said, "Well, I want to add some more music to it." And I had visited Kent, and he had a 5-string that sounded awesome. I said, "Man, would you make me a 5-string?" So then it was sort of like, I got the 5-string in August, and I recorded with it like in maybe October 1st or end of September. I had less than 2 months, and I just went for it, and because it just offered. I just loved playing it, and it was just another new dimension that I want to explore.
And I remember reading that optionally you could go with the high C or
The low B.
the low B, or were you experimenting with both?
I was at the time doing both. Okay. Yeah, and I recorded.
Have you done a lot of 5-string?
guts over probably at least half of the CD was done on this 5-string that the department got. This was this giant Hammond Ashley. It was like a contrabass violin based on the Carlene Hutchins designs, and yeah, it was sitting in a I think it was I can't remember the name of the string shop, but in La Jolla, it had been there and it belonged to a bass player in the Seattle Symphony, and anyhow, we got it for a song. And then, but it was awesome sounding, so I decided let me explore it. And I'm a big guy, so I was able to handle it to a point.
Now, is that the bass that was in your office?
Yes.
Okay, because I played that bass. Because
Yeah.
I remember that I had never really gotten to know the whole Hutchins
Yeah.
instrument lineage I didn't know much about it. And then I did this trip where we were both down in Tijuana for Andres Martin's
Right.
event. And then I came up and we did that interview.
Right.
And I remember playing that bass in your office
Right.
and just the tone
Yeah.
but I guess I forgot that it was a 5-string. too.
Right.
Okay. So that's
Yeah.
what we're using on it.
And the Hutchins family and the foundation exists in Encinitas under the good leadership, handling of Joe McNally.
Yeah.
Was a great person and fine musician.
Just thinking about notation
Yeah.
and what you did, like just the challenges of what gets lost in translation, trying to put something down maybe on paper.
Yeah.
And I know that you mentioned you're working on some video examples for an upcoming book.
Right.
I imagine that actually being able to demonstrate via video, and I know that there was some of that behind Guts too,
Right.
right? Yeah. So that must really, I think a lot might be lost in translation trying to put it down on paper that maybe
Yeah.
video facilitates.
Well, certainly it's a direct, a direct demonstration, and notation is, so many contemporary techniques are not standardized. There are multiple notations, even for harmonics. How many different, notations for normal harmonics do we run into? And so, even the traditions of what octave they exist just changed in my lifetime.
Yeah.
It used to be that harmonics were sounded in real pitch, not transposed pitch. Of course, that's changed. It's adopted pretty much as what the norm is now, and whether they're filled in diamond heads or, all that stuff. But then when you start talking about, bitones or, that kind of stuff, then you're getting into measuring the instrument on another level, not to mention all the different levels of, how do you measure pressure, for example? Bow speed we can sort of do. If a chord note equals 60, then you can sort of measure how long something's going to last just by length of bow. But pressure and then even angle, how do you specify that? And then so that whole idea of mapping, what I call mapping timbre, is just kind of an extension of like mapping where your right hand goes is located, because words that used to mean something like Ponticello to me is like way too general.
Yeah.
Because if you could start pulling out harmonics, then those are really specific frequencies that you can literally measure. And it's sort of like the bow becomes like a harmonic, can create harmonics just like the left hand does, creating artificial harmonics with the bow itself.
Mapping timbre is a great
Yeah.
way to describe. I have such a great memory. We may have talked about this when we
Yeah.
chatted several years ago. I remember it in Mexico.
Right.
We were in this room at one of those annexes,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
Andres, and you were just going through, just playing this riff with all the basses and showing them
Right.
how to with different bow pressure and placement, and just how to like activate different harmonics on this. And it was just such a cool an eye-opening demonstration
Mhm.
of and I'm sure you've done that many times in your life, but I thought what a great way to just open people's mind to timbre, because I think
Right.
somebody, certainly the training I had, is like, Ponticello is about as
Well-
out there as it gets a lot of the time.
I remember I did Dave Walter invited me to do a master class at Juilliard, and we remember talking, and he talked about the Heifetz proportion, which was a word that I had never heard that, and I've looked it up, and I've never seen anything. But that meant, he said that the Heifetz proportion was like according to him, was at a perfect 12th, the 12th partial from the left-hand location. So that was like, let's see, 3 octaves in a perfect fifth. So like you could actually find that with, using a right-hand pizzicato harmonic down below the string, and find that, and you place the bow there, and then you get this really resonant, pitch, but the thing is, what you're playing, where it's located is the 12th, but what is sounded is the 6th partial. So there's, anyhow, I don't know, I can get into the weeds about that, but I don't think that'll be in the book. Anyhow, but it's endlessly fascinating. So where you place the bow really affects the complexion of the pitch, the amount of overtones, which ones. And of course, we all know that the closer you get to the bridge, the crunchier the sound is. And, it's sort of like, I keep thinking like how revolutionary Gary Carr was. I mean, he was playing close to the bridge and making this really brilliant solo sound that penetrated, and it had all those high harmonics, and we just had not heard that. I had never heard of that. And then of course the pendulum, then you have, the Francois Rebath, which is another whole different idea about tone, and both beautiful, both infinitely of value, So it's just, I just think about, but he was really on to something that, in a way, I've it makes more and more sense the more I think about it, because I start using it in these other unintended ways. How to, like, if you start using the bow to parse out specific harmonics, they bring out, well, you can hear them as discrete harmonics, or in fact, they're multiphonics. Once you get past the octave, then you start getting, anyhow, but these are things that you can measure and recreate, and but once you start getting into flautando harmonics or multiphonics, then you're dealing with areas of control within limits. So like limits of precision even. You can have the right place, but whether you get the single harmonic or get the band is really, there's so many variables that one cannot predict. But if the ideal is just this, you can definitely, a composer can create a contour. And I've had composers like Lei Liang, who wrote a chamber piece for me called Luminous, and he really wrote a melody with this kind of, using these flautando harmonics. And, and again, it was sort of like, and it was the idea of like, Chinese brush painting being the ideal rather than this kind of, digital parsing. And all of a sudden it makes it, nature-like, and it just feels right for what it is.
A former student of yours that
Kyle Model.
There we go, Kyle. Thank you. I remember talking with Kyle. He put together this book, going through, and just thinking about, I think it was like a 4-octave F major scale.
In one position.
Yeah. Which I had never thought of, but mind blown.
Yeah.
Just that one concept.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to him about just some of the specifics that composers ask for, and he was mentioning certain partials like way up there, and he's like, yes, it can be done, but do you know how incredibly challenging threading the needle is to actually like land one of those?
Yeah, that's true. But what in the last couple of years, some of these things have gotten easier. So, for example, there's what I've been exploring has been dual node and triple node harmonics. So if like you take a 9th partial, which is like on an A natural on the G string. It's a distance of whatever that distance is. If you touch it the same distance with your fourth finger, you'll get the second ninth. And if you move it to where the fourth finger, that's the third ninth, you can get 8 different, by double noting, which is something that, David Allen Moore kind of identified in
fractal
in
fingering.
fractal
Yeah,
fingering. But
exactly.
I'm using it for a completely different end. So, and then if you take those divisions and then touch in the middle, then it transposes it up an octave. So like a ninth becomes an 18th partial. And then you do it on this side, you get another 18th. So like you can get even smaller, higher partials than usually you don't see anything above the 21st. I've hit much higher through double noting, and then, which is fun, it's kind of it's easily accessible. But what's even more exciting to me is like, well, what are the intervals that it accesses? So if I take, let's say a minor third, which on the open G string is located on B flat and it correlates with the 6 partial. If I split that in half, that's the 12th. Now the half step, so that's flatter than a whole step and sharper than a half step, and it's a very specific interval. Anyhow, you can just start hitting and recreating intervals that are outside of the grid of equal temperament, which has been, a fascination to composers and creative players forever, and so using the symmetry of harmonics, you can easily access it, predictably access it. So it's like, wow, this implies a new musical potentials. But then how do you notate it? And so that again, and I have spent a couple of years trying to come up what is the best solution. And most of the time when we see microtonality, we see either quarter sharps, quarter flats, but that doesn't really line up with how the string is. It's not equal temperament is not idiomatic to the string because we're talking about fractions. So I use accidentals with arrows less than or more than, and then on top of that, I will put I'll put a ratio, so 1/6, or I'll put the first 6 or the second 6th, I'll put the third 12th. Again, it's just another way to measure it, and then if I want to, I could put in another step, I could put the sense sharp or flat of a normal half step. So I mean, I'm just trying to figure out because the fractions, I think, really speak to a player, because that's something you can tactically measure, and then there anyhow, and then I think that, and then having the sense, any musician with a $20 tuner or a tuning app on their phone can literally get that feedback, which is something we never had before. So the thing that stuff is spatial as well as kinesthetic, but then of course you mitigate it. You learn to hear these other spaces, and the fact that there's a way to actually enter that world is something that, it's exciting, because then you can start really playing around there. So like, for example, between a B flat on the G string and an A half step, that's there are 4 harmonics that you can parse. So like you get the A natural is a 9th partial, the B flat is the 6th partial. You can get 6, 7, 8, 9. So, and it's a flat 7, but it sounds kind of like a minor pentatonic shape. And then if you play them across all 4 strings, you can just get a timbre and pitch feel that is just, it's uniquely beautiful and accessible, and it just points to a bunch of stuff.
Is there any, this is like a nerdy based question, although maybe we're
Yeah,
in
yeah,
nerdy based territory.
we're already deep in it.
What have you found, like in terms of just like either your approach to the bass or even specifics like strings or rosin that sort of lends itself to like getting those to speak?
I usually can get them on any bass I touch.
Okay.
So I don't worry about the gear so much. I tend to use, Tomastic Spiracore. I've used other strings, but mostly, I'm used to Tomastic stuff because, if you want those partials, you can do it. They're accessible. And then, and I tend to use Pops rosin because it works.
So it's really more of like your approach to it.
Yeah,
I mean, very standard. Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
just like everything else about playing, it's in whose hands it is, right? Someone will play your bass and they'll sound like themselves. The bass will take you so far, but then it's really what's in your body and in your conception of sound.
Well, I remember talking with Sam Suggs about this. I guess one of the beautiful things about harmonics on the bass is they are in, because of just the register that our fundamentals are in, is that they are in a register that is enjoyable to do.
And they're audible.
They're audible. They're in a register that is it's just fertile ground for exploration.
Sure.
And so as opposed to like maybe if you were doing this on the E string on a violin or something like
They'd
that.
be inaudible.
Right. Exactly. The dogs maybe.
Yeah. No, that's one of the beauties of the instrument.
Yeah. And then once people find, and then just like demonstrate the possibility to both players and composers, then that just opens up all these new doors. I remember doing some sessions with, this is on Zoom with a composer in Nashville that's writing video game music. And all we did was I got on my bass and he's like, what does it sound like if you do this? Like C plus, Bartok Pitts plus, Ponticello and this and that. He's just like, wow. And it just have, stuff that I think of as like fairly basic, now we're not talking about like bitones or anything like that, but just showing the possibilities that there are. And I know that's been a big part of what you've done. And I know what Bert Strutsky did with all those people, just like opening up people's eyes and minds to the possibilities.
Yeah. But, I think what is that people discovered this stuff by goofing off, by improvising and just, what's this? What's this? What's this? And then what might be a happy accident. And if you want to go any place, you have to figure, now what the heck is that? And then you actually have to start thinking about it, and you have to start learning about how to map, understand the harmonics. I didn't understand it before. And then now, you realize that these numbers actually have lots of different meanings, and it's kind of like, wow. So, if you talk, even going back to the turn of the century, Henry Cowell wrote an important book where he talked about, that pitch and rhythm were the same thing. And there's the videos, you've seen this, like Dan Tepfer, and all Stockhausen did a lot of this. We'll take the interval of the ratio 2 to 3, and there are these beautiful coincidences, if you divide this, that you'll find a perfect fifth, and the third partial, which is the interval of fifth, they coincide at the same location. However, the pitch result is not exactly the same. They're microtonally off, but they're of the timbre is such that you can use it, and it sounds completely sonorous on the bass and with other strings. And of course that's, so there's good stuff there, fun stuff to play with.
Well, I remember this was probably when we were chatting in San Diego several years ago, but I remember talking about, because as we're talking about this, some of this can sound maybe to somebody a little bit academic, like we're dividing this, but I remember you describing like, I'm looking for something, then I see what the emotion there, like I'm looking for something that like elicits an emotion or this, and I just remember like that being sort of like a through line chatting with you. And so which is, what we want to do as
of course,
as musicians.
And so, I mean, absolutely. And, the nerdy work of trying to translate it to information does make things sound academic. But I don't really care about any of the stuff. It's like, well, where's the music? And where is the music? And that's really the thing that justifies what one's doing. It's sort of like, okay, well, it's, and that's, I guess that's part of the, and improvisationally, it will lead me to emotional places that I can, edit and codify, and then they become, can become compositions. But I, usually am working always in the improvisational mode more often than not. But again, the whole idea of translating this to information, you just like, the more you learn, the more you can just kind of toss it off, and then it just becomes your tools. And then you can start playing it and finding contexts that are in your guts. And again, most of the stuff just comes by experimentation anyhow. I reached it from, stumbling onto it, and then, but at a certain point, then you have to start looking, what is this? And that, then that becomes like, you're entering the nerd fest. And, there's many times I've felt like, oh man, I feel like Don Quixote chasing harmonic windmills, but there's no, there's no way around it. There's no way around learning something. You may want to jump over that wall, but you have to go through it. So it's just the same.
So much of this comes through improvisation, but then obviously then you develop this vocabulary.
Yeah.
And as you're describing that, I'm thinking about those stories of John Coltrane playing through the lexicon of scales, modes, and all that, or somebody working through Galamian or name whatever, But like, when you come to the bass these days, like, what does your time? Are you in an improvisational kind of framework most of the time when you pick up the bass, or do you have sort of like a way of like keeping the blade sharp? Some people call it. Like, do you have?
I mean, I do traditional stuff. Long tone, string crossing, scales, pitch, rhythm. The fundamentals do not go away. And I teach, and so I teach at UC San Diego for 20 years now. And so like I'm dealing with repertoire, other people's repertoire, some repertoire I've not even played. And then I have the music that I'm preparing for whatever's on the table, like it's this weekend is Trio M, and then the Trio M book, which is our own music. But then on Tuesday, I'm playing the music of Henry Threadgill. Now that has really specific demands and also a specific kind of notation that I have to absorb and learn. So it's when I was on sabbatical, then I was just working on the book and trying to carve out my understanding and mapping things on another level and trying to figure out this idea of what timbre mapping is, and trying to find this idea that things operate in parallel seems to be a metaphor that I see operating on lots of different parameters. And it's like, well, this is kind of interesting and weird and kind of poetic. And I don't know where I'm going with it, but I just continue and try to just capture, grab as many ideas and as I can. And then I have a couple of people I've been working with on the book to, editors who, give me feedback, and it's been an amazing, long, arduous process. What I thought started out as my COVID project is now in its fourth year. And
well, we've talked a bit about it, but what's sort of the scope of what you're putting together with this? And it sounds like it's getting close.
Oh, yeah. We're sort of more or less in a revision mode, but the new things come up. So sure. Like, sort of breaking down things in terms of, well, of course there are things around technique, different extended techniques, and then, and then how to, and since it's a book, you're trying to figure how to put this on, I mean, I think the working title is Bass Mappings, Adaptations, Extensions, Inventions. So the adaptations of, fundamentals of string playing, musicianship. I mean, the fact that location, weight, speed, angle, those things never, it's like gravity's always true. there's no getting around those things, but how you reimagine that. And then, you start adding, well, what about directionality? Well, if the bow moves vertically, it behaves completely differently, so that, anyhow, so I'm sort of looking at the techniques, and I'm looking at through kind of foundational exercises that you can use, and then specific studies that open up the areas, and then kind of improvisational prompts as well.
Cool. Well, I
Yeah,
can't wait
yeah,
to see the finished product.
yeah.
It's pretty.
Me too.
Well, Mark, I know you got a a sound check coming up,
Yeah.
so our time is probably drawing to an end. But I'll
Yeah.
I'll link up to your website and
Great. Thank you.
whatever we talked about. Anywhere else you want me to send people in particular, or?
I'll have it up through the the usual channels of social
Cool.
media. Yeah, there'll be my Instagram, my website. What is a website? Yeah. Anyhow, and it's out. Yeah. But thank you very much.